It really was like a comedy of errors for them last week. I don't know if they can entirely clean it up, but I think I'm much higher on their offense, even after a 7-point output. All but one of their drives went into the Dolphins' territory last weekend. They ended up with 7 points. I think there'll be some positive regression there at some point. So very wide range on what they could be. I think that they're probably better than people think that they are, but still not a good team.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and today I'm thrilled to have Rob Pizzola on the show. He's a professional sports bettor who specializes in the NFL, and he's also came on the show to talk about some interesting new projects. Among other topics, we talk about just how shocking Denver at Seattle was on Monday night of NFL Week 1. He gives us a Week 2 NFL bet that he likes, and he gives an even more shocking prediction for the 2022 NFL season. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be 3 things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. If you sign up, I'll send you my top 5 sports betting podcast episodes, an education through your ears. To check it out, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for sports betting information through my PhD level analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. The Football Analytics Show is also supported by listeners like you. More about that at the end of the episode. Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Rob Pizzola. He's a professional sports bettor. He's the co-founder of The Hammer, which we'll get into in this episode. He is a co-owner of BetStamp, and he is the co-host of the awesome Circles Off podcast. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me again, Ed.
Absolutely. So, Rob, we witnessed historic levels of NFL ineptitude last night. We had a game between the Denver Broncos and the Seattle Seahawks. And, I was sitting there towards the end of the game and I was prepping for this podcast. I was typing things into my phone. I didn't really want to leave the game, but, I'm kind of half watching Denver drive, and I fully expect Russell Wilson to just get them in the field position and kick the field goal. And then we see what you call something that was on the Mount Rushmore of NFL bad decisions. Like what in the world happened with the Denver Broncos last night?
Yeah, it was just horribly managed clock inside the last minute of the game. And I'm watching in real time. I'm watching this clock bleed. I'm thinking in my head, okay, Denver might want to conserve all 3 of their timeouts here just in case they go for this 4th down. They don't get it. The game is not completely over. They might have a chance to get the ball back, but then they bleed the entire clock. Russell Wilson uses a timeout with 1 second left on the play clock. So they're facing a 4th and 5, which to me is just a very obvious go for it type of situation there. They bring out the field goal unit to try a 64-yarder, which would be an NFL record, and it misses. They lose the game. I don't know how it got so dire so quickly for Denver on that final drive. Like anyone watching Broncos Seahawks last night, as soon as the Broncos got the ball, they're pretty much thinking to themselves, this is going to be game over. Russell Wilson's going to drive this team into field goal range. They might even score a touchdown, but they just wasted so much time and ran such a horrible 2-minute drill essentially at the end there that they were forced to attempt a 64-yard field goal. And I there's really no words for it. I don't know how that happens at the NFL level. I often tell people, I say this all the time, but there's only 32 NFL head coaching jobs on the entire planet. You can't tell me that you can mismanage a clock that badly. One of the 32 best in the world, or supposedly, can mismanage a clock that badly. So it was horrendous. I was actually in awe. Like I still couldn't believe what I had witnessed. And when they brought the field goal unit onto the field, I almost had to slap myself in the face. Like, I actually could not believe what was happening in that final minute of the game.
I could not as well. I thought I had just distracted myself so much that I missed something, but then you look at the replay and, they had a fourth down with about a minute left and the clock got down to 20 some seconds?
Yep.
And then, of course, Hackett tries to make up for it by calling worthless timeouts after he misses the field goal, which I thought was just added to the hilarity.
Well, it did. It really did. Like, it was like, okay, let the game end at this point. When was the last time we saw a fumbled snap in sort of like a kneel down situation? I remember Phillip Rivers did it once. I think it's happened maybe once in my lifetime where that's changed something. I guess maybe fine, you're a coach, you kind of play to win, you play till the final whistle or whatever. But I thought that was pretty lame. It was. That is like a disaster of epic proportions at the end of the game. There, it really. We see botched clock management every season. Maybe this was more magnified because it was in a primetime spot, but that was about as horrible as it gets.
And I just find it shocking that we're really talking about that is as horrible as it gets, because we've seen some wretched decision making, right? I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, just everything that Mike Tomlin does on fourth down and punting situations. I'm thinking, didn't Anthony Lynn call like a run play down a couple points with like 24 seconds left on the clock, and then all of a sudden, like this goes above everything that we typically complain about on an NFL Sunday, on an NFL week.
Yep. For me, what personally hits home is the Cowboys 49ers playoff game last year. I'm a Cowboys fan. That was the final drive of the game with Dak Prescott scrambling and then Dallas not being able to get up and spike the ball. That to me was the one in recent memory that I remember. And then I kind of just completely forgot about that after Nathaniel Hackett last night. So, I mean, Russell Wilson has to shoulder some of the blame as well. I don't put that completely on the coach, but letting the entire play clock bleed there was just a massive mistake for one. On top of it, attempting the field goal was also a massive mistake. But I don't mind if they hurry up to the line, run a fourth down play, they keep all three timeouts. But as soon as they bring that timeout, like that, what are you doing at that point? You've wasted 40 seconds. Even if you do convert the first down, you're still looking at a long field goal anyways, in all likelihood. So I don't know. It was just again, I'm actually like, it's a day later now, still in awe of what we witnessed last night.
A little bit earlier in the game, Denver was maybe, within the 5-yard line. They were down 4. They had another fourth down. I thought they should have gone for it. I mean, it was kind of one of these typical, like, you have Russell Wilson. There's a reason you got him. Go for it. If you miss it, you have 3 timeouts and you have a probably not good Seattle offense pinned deep in their own territory.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And that turned out to be just like a typical NFL stupid decision. And then we just saw way worse, which is unbelievable. But let's actually bring this back to betting, Rob. I know you use a lot of kind of coaching analytics. How much are you downgrading Denver based on what we saw last night?
I would say so. I haven't updated for Denver and Seattle today. I would say probably nothing, to be completely honest with you. Just looking at the metrics of the game, Denver's defense did not hold up as well as I thought they would, particularly against the pass. It was surprising to me that the Seahawks did pass as much as they did. I thought they would be a pretty run-heavy team. Offensively, though, for Denver, they pretty much had whatever they wanted through the air. 0.43 EPA per play, 49% success rate. That's on 47 passes. So those are pretty staggeringly good numbers. You look at the rushing success rate, 53% on 19 rushes. EPA wasn't as good, but that was because of the fumbles. So overall, the Denver offense is going to, people look at the final score, they'll see the 16 points. They were better than people will give them credit for. They were really marching up and down the field. Obviously, 2 4th and 1s, at 2 goal line stands there. just kind of like a crazy game where the red zone efficiency was horrible. I don't know if that's going to continue. I'd be inclined to say that it doesn't. Historically speaking, Russell Wilson has been pretty good in the red zone. So I'm not really willing to move these teams all that much after the one game. I think great win for Seattle. They got outplayed. A lot of things went in their favor for them to win a game by 1 point. Whereas Denver, I think, is kind of like a sneaky, fine performance that just ended in a way where we will have a sour taste in our mouth with this team. But overall, I mean, I'm not overly concerned about them going forwards.
But do you make a coaching adjustment for? I mean, we've never seen Hackett as a head coach before, so are you just kind of making a note of that in your mind, or are you saying that's like we're the half point yet, or something like that?
So a lot of the coaching will play out in how a team actually performs, right? So I try not to get too carried away. There are definitely some coaches that struggle with in-game management that do a very good job of getting their teams prepared and putting together good game plans. Kyle Shanahan comes to mind. Sean McVay comes to mind as some guys that are historically good game planners, but in the game, they look completely lost. I think that's what potentially we might be seeing with Nathaniel Hackett here. That's obviously concerning. I'd like to give him a larger sample than what we saw. I mean, it is first game. You never know what's going to happen type of thing, or, just kind of succumb to the pressure of being in that situation. But it's something to monitor. Overall, though, I mean, I do think that Denver played a decent game. If we look at expected points for the game, very close to, should have been a touchdown winner rather than a 1 point loser. So I'm not overly concerned with Hackett out of the gate here.
That makes a lot of sense. And thank you for talking me off that ledge a little bit. So Rob, you launched a new company called The Hammer, sports betting media company. Tell us a little bit about the company and why you decided to start it.
Why we decided to start it, that's an interesting one. I've been in the content space for a long time. I started in the content space when I was in my early 20s as a radio producer for a sports betting media company, which was The Score at the time. Eventually became a host there. I've always loved content, keeping up with it. Really, I've noticed a large gap in market right now in terms of content typically seems to be geared to only one type of audience. So what I mean is you'll have some content creators that create sharp sports betting content. And most of the people that consume that are sharp bettors, semi-pro bettors, pro bettors, so on and so forth. Then you have the complete opposite end of the spectrum where there is a lot of more casual content, recreational content. You see a lot of this on TikTok and Instagram. A lot of it, more of a sense of community. Not really, anyone that's qualified to necessarily be giving betting advice, but trying to build some sort of a sense of community. There's nothing really that appeals to the masses, at least that I've been able to find, where both a sharp or recreational might get value out of it. So that's kind of what the idea behind the Hammer was all about. The idea was really formed about 3 months ago. So we've had to get this project together very quickly. But we've been able to do that. So we've been able to source about 50 different content creators, some of them pro bettors, some of them semi-pro, some are just sharp, but don't bet heavily. Some are more square recreational, some are bigger personalities. But essentially, we did want to build a platform that can appeal to the masses. So somebody might find something on there, essentially any type of bettor can find something on there that would be appealing to them. So we got that out of the gate a week ago. People can check it out at thehammer.bet, and kind of wanted to make it more modern as well, right? Where people can consume content on their own schedule. Obviously, we'll do some live stuff, but also, if anyone who goes to the site will see that it's, very much looks like a Netflix or a YouTube. That's what we were going for, where it can just be like a one-stop shop for anyone at any point in the day, and they can find content that is suited to them.
So this really started 3 months ago, and you have you got like 50 people to contribute to this network?
It has been an absolute grind for me over the course of the past 3 months, and my co-founders, Johnny and Julian as well, who co-founded BetStamp. All worthwhile. I enjoyed every second of it, but definitely been working a lot of hours over that span. I don't think people really understand what it might take to put something like this together in that short of a time period. Not only from a content perspective, but from a product perspective, like having a functional product. And we were able to accomplish that. So I'm really proud of the team altogether. Frankly, we actually have more than 50 content creators signed on, but a lot of them are for sports that aren't in season right now, like NBA or NHL, which we'll be adding to the mix in the near term as well. So yeah, it was a lot of hard work, Ed, to be completely honest with you. At times, if you had asked me at the end of July whether I thought we were going to be able to launch for week 1 NFL, I would have said you were absolutely crazy. But it all came together pretty nicely, and I'm happy with the reception that we've gotten so far.
That's amazing. So, Rob, when I introduced you, I talked about a lot of things. You are a pro sports bettor. NFL and NHL are two of your biggest sports. You are a co-owner of BetStamp, and I know you put a lot of work into that. You are also doing a lot of content with Circles Off podcasts. I mean, what did you just not have enough work to do, or like what was just the motivation? Is it the love? Are you looking to sell this at some point?
Well, definitely. Whenever I get involved with a company, it's not to like start something and then flip it in 6 months. That's not really who I am. I'm about growing things and building them. I was the product manager for The Score for several years on their main enterprise app. And I just loved absolutely building that. I'm passionate about building good products. I'm also a guy that has trouble saying no in general. So if I hear a good idea, I'm going to get involved with it. So I often do take on more than I can chew. I wouldn't say more than I can chew, but like essentially I am working a lot. I'm at the desk a lot. But
yeah, you have to be.
Yeah, of course. So would I be ecstatic if we got an offer at some point in the next 1 to 2 years for someone to buy the hammer, and we got paid for that? Sure, I would be. Is that my goal? No, right now it's not. It's just to build up a great product, a great user base, and establish it. And if there is an offer at some point, then sure, we would consider it. If not, then I'm happy to continue going down this path. Same thing goes for BetStamp, right? It wasn't necessarily like, obviously I would be lying if I didn't see financial gain in the projects I'm working on. I am a guy that's driven by money. That's something that's important to me. So I rarely get involved in stuff where I don't see a financial end to it. However, with BetStamp, it was the same thing. It's just, to me, it was a great product. I wanted to be involved with a great product. It's something that I was regularly using on a day-to-day basis and still use on a day-to-day basis. So I'm happy to contribute to that. So, I don't know where the future leads. I definitely hope that I'm compensated well at some point with some nice exits of these companies. If that doesn't happen, though, I'm pretty happy with my roles with both. In sort of like a consulting fashion and managing a team of people that are learning from me, which is important as well. So all in all, very happy with where we're at. Hope it leads to something down the road. But if it doesn't, then I wouldn't consider it time wasted, because I do enjoy the day-to-day, despite the fact that it's some long hours.
Excellent. One thing I really like about the Hammer, and the thing I'm excited about going into the future, is essentially that you, as a pro sports bettor, are curating people that I should listen to. I think a good example is Parker, who is a college football guy, and working in college football, I know he's good, and it's someone that people should take seriously. And you guys have him do, I think, 3 shows a week. Something that I haven't been as good about, or I just don't know people who talk about it at a high level, is like soccer betting. So I feel like I'm excited to engage in I don't remember who the soccer guy that you guys have, but when I was flipping through the shows, I saw that you have one, right? And otherwise, it's kind of hard to figure out someone who can talk intelligently about soccer betting, right? I mean, you can kind of filter out people that don't make any sense, and but I think I like that aspect of it, right? And you obviously would only bring on people that you trust and people whose information you want out there.
For sure. So It's challenging for me in terms of getting content creators together as well, because I'm very, consumed in the Twitter space. I focus mainly on football and hockey, which is what I like to gear my timeline towards. I don't have a lot of insight into good soccer bettors, MMA bettors, tennis, so on and so forth, sports that I don't bet myself and don't really, follow religiously. So it was important to build a good team here. We hired Alex Moretto to be our head of content. He has been a godsend in terms of being able to source creators from all sorts of different sports, because he is enamored with the sports betting content space as well. So that was a huge help. He was able to bring on Mark O'Hare and Paul McDonald for soccer coverage, which has been great. I consume all the Hammer betting content as well. I learn stuff about sports that I don't bet on. I find that to be fantastic. Matt Landis, who you've talked to several times, Ed,
Absolutely.
as well, is part of our team. He put together a great list of people that we should go after, and we were able to onboard a lot of his suggestions as well. So this has definitely been a team effort in terms of assembling the cast that we have. We want to just, the difference, or what's kind of separates ourselves, I think, from the way that other networks will do things, is that we are aiming to be as transparent as possible. I don't care if there's someone that gives out advice on the Hammer that's not a winning bettor, as long as they're not misrepresenting themselves as a winning bettor. So all the plays that are given out on the Hammer are tracked on BetStamp. Each show has an individual show account. Each creator has a creator account. We're trying to go a transparent route, and just not mislead people. I think that's the issue that I have with the betting content nowadays. I don't really care what people consume. Everyone's entitled to consume whatever they want to. If you find something entertaining, then watch it. But where I have an issue is when the creator, passes themselves off as a betting expert or a pro bettor
Right.
when they are not. And I don't think that there's a need for that in the space. I think it's incredibly misleading. And I think it could potentially be very damaging as well, because, there people who are viewing this content or consuming it aren't necessarily able to tell the difference between someone who knows what they're talking about and someone who doesn't. So for me, I'm happy to give anyone an opportunity on the Hammer, even if they're not a winning bettor, if they do provide entertaining content. My only ask, and when we bring them on, is to just be themselves and be real with the audience. We, obviously people don't want to lose and they don't want to let people know that they lose, but it's fine. It's okay. 99% of bettors lose. I don't understand why it's such an issue for people just to admit that they're a losing bettor. So that's kind of the way that we're going about it here, is trying to be real with the audience. And I hope that will really resonate with people.
How big is the entertainment component of what you're trying to do with the Hammer?
I think over time we want it to be 50-50 as much as possible. And I also think that we're aiming to have shows where and content pieces where we staff a entertaining creator or recreational creator, however you want to refer to them as, with someone who's a little bit more sharp and a true betting analyst. So we have a lot of ideas how to do that going forwards, but I think it's important. Like at the end of the day, anyone can produce a half an hour video that's, extremely compelling in terms of the way that they break down a game, really might be able to arrive at some great bets by the end. But if it can't keep people for the 30 minutes, can't keep people watching and engaged, then it's not really a great piece of content. So I think there needs to be a good overlap between the two, and that's what we're striving for.
Excellent. Rob, let's move on to your NFL betting. I've known you for a number of years, and your process has always been evolving, as it should, with someone who's a pro. I remember when we first met, you were mostly doing yards per play, and I don't remember all the iterations, but now, over the last couple of years, you talked a lot more about player-based metrics. What is the current in 2022 of how you handicap the NFL?
Yeah, so obviously, as new metrics become available, you evolve as a sports bettor. For me, there's no one single metric that I'm using for everything. We've talked about this before, Ed, but I do like to evaluate different positional groups in different ways. So there might be one metric, for example, that is very predictive for quarterbacks. That metric may not be as predictive for, I don't know, an offensive lineman. I'm just throwing random stuff out there. So I really do things in terms of positional groups and trying to find the metrics that are most predictive nowadays. I obviously reference EPA per play a lot. I'm very focused on EPA per play. There are some drawbacks to it, obviously, because of how heavily turnovers affect EPA and how luck driven some of the turnovers are. So I think balancing that with success rates as well is important. I don't think yards per play is completely useless at this point, but I do think it is a step behind some of the other key metrics. But for me, it's important to evaluate every single positional group and keep up to date with what's out there. Some it's tougher than others. Like, some positional groups, offensive line is, historically speaking, I think the toughest for a lot of people because there's just not a lot of great data available out there. But with that said, that's sort of my process. I always try to arrive at a number on a game before I actually look at what the sportsbook number is. That's just a habit of mine in general with anything. Make my own number, then decide whether I'm going to bet it or not after I see what the sportsbook is posting.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I did some work on offensive line this offseason, and it was interesting because I kind of started with the counting stats like pressure rate and pressure rate allowed for each lineman. And I actually found that PFF grades were more predictive from season to season. And, it doesn't take long to figure out why that's the case. It's because quarterbacks own so much of pressure rate, and it is pretty consistent. I think it's, and I know you've done your own work on and all this stuff as well. But I presume that's the kind of things that you're doing to kind of evolve season by season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you learn about new metrics all the time. So like a couple years ago, ESPN, I believe was ESPN, came out with the pass block win rate, pass rush win rate, stuff like that. I've started to incorporate that a little bit. I definitely look at Pro Football Focus grades pretty regularly, but you have to remember I think Pro Football Focus is a great resource for everyone. However, they are making models based off of their grades. So you have to do something to differentiate yourself as well. So I'm always looking to improve over just using grades for everyone. I think at some positional groups, they are very predictive. At others, they're not. But yeah, like that's kind of my thing, especially I follow so many NFL analytics accounts on Twitter. Whenever I see something new that I haven't heard of before, I'm going to kind of do a deep dive into that specific metric and decide whether I'm going to incorporate that into the model. So that's what I really enjoy about NFL betting specifically, is just like the evolution year over year, and how we can use new metrics to refine the models.
You talked a little bit about EPA, expected points added. I thought it was pretty interesting that Fabian Sumo was talking about how that has kind of taken over from DVOA. This was an episode of the Deep Dive podcast. And it's obviously pretty easy to get all that information because of the work that the NFL Fast Star team has done. They make it pretty easy to just download all that stuff and get the model. Does it make you, I would say, I guess, does it make you hesitant to use it a little bit just because you know that a lot of the other people betting the NFL are using those metrics?
Not really. You have to, right? Like if you know that there's a metric that's incredibly predictive and valuable, you have to incorporate it in some capacity. It's how else, what else you use and how you derive your probabilities, I think, that will differentiate you in market. So, it's at some point, everybody's going to be using the same type of stuff. It's more so the application of those metrics to your model that can differentiate you from someone else. So I'm not overly concerned with that. I think it's a necessity just to always be using the best data available.
Rob, you mentioned that you come up with your own number before you look at what the market has. Is that an automated process? Like, do you have a script that just says, okay, well, I want to consider all these metrics for positional groups, and maybe I throw a little bit of EPA or yards per play or whatever? Or is there more of a subjective component to that when you're coming up with that number?
It's mostly automated, but there's a subjective component in that I'm essentially feeding my model what I think the game plan is going to be for each team. So that is purely, I say this all the time, but if I were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, knock on wood that I don't, and to go away, somebody who gets my model or was able to access my model would not necessarily arrive at the same outputs on a weekly basis that I would have, because there is a subjective layer to what I do. I did try to automate that at one point, but I just never got comfortable with doing that. And I'm okay with the process and the hours that it takes to to do that myself, because I think that, whether or not it's true, I believe that it separates me from others in the space. And I'm fairly good at doing that in my mind. So there's a few manual inputs on a weekly basis that need to go in. Then everything else will run itself. And then essentially I'm going to get a number on a game. Now I'm going to decide whether I'm going to bet that number or not. And in some cases, I'll just get a number that looks, crazy, and I do a deep dive into that specific game to figure out why my model is spitting that out, and then decide whether I think that it's still a valuable bet or not, or if there's something wrong that needs to be rejigged. So that's sort of the process for me.
Excellent. Is there a week 2 game spread or total that you're looking at? It's kind of early. It's Tuesday, but I was just wondering if you had a game for this upcoming week.
So we're seeing it move a little bit now as we're recording this. It's tough to. I'll still give it out because it's the single game that I've bet so far this week, but it's the squarest play on the board. You're going to see all sorts of stuff this week about how the sports books need the Dallas Cowboys, to cover, flooded with action on Cincinnati, teasers on Cincinnati, so on and so forth. You're going to see all sorts of stuff about how, the look ahead line in this game was Dallas -1.5 or -2.5. Should there be this much of a downgrade from Dak Prescott to Cooper Rush? And people are going to say, it's only really a touchdown downgrade, going to bet Dallas. I think that it is a monumental downgrade. I don't agree with the look-ahead number in this game. I would have made this very close to a pick'em, if not Cincinnati small favorite, if this game was in week 1. But there are compounding issues for the Cowboys now as well, with Connor McGovern hurt on the offensive line. Already a weak offensive line going into the year because of the injury to Tyron Smith, because they got rid of Lyle Collins, who's going to be on the other side of the ball this week. You get Jaron Kearse injured at safety. You have a wide receiver situation where James Washington's on IR. Michael Gallup, there's a chance he might play this week, but I would imagine he's on a limited snap count if he does. So it's really ugly and dire for Dallas. I think they're a legitimate bottom 3 team in the NFL right now. Cincinnati, very misleading. Like, Cincinnati had a -5 turnover margin and went to overtime last week. Really, they actually should have won in regulation because Jamar Chase scored a touchdown that was not ruled a touchdown on the field, and the Bengals didn't challenge it. But that's pretty impressive to be able to overcome that. Granted, it's the Steelers, but are the Steelers really, much worse than the Cowboys will be this week? I don't think so. So to me, that was always short at 7. I wouldn't be surprised to see this keep climbing. I have this number closer to 10. So wow. I have bet the Bengals already this week. I think this is one of those games where I would consider alternate spreads as well, as I think this one could get out of hand.
According to the BetStamp app, it's Tuesday morning. There's places where you can get Cincinnati -7.5. With Dallas, you said they're a bottom 3 team. And obviously Dak Prescott is hurt, and that's a big deal. But I think if they're a bottom 3 team, you can't really have a ton of faith in their defense. This is a defense that was pretty good when I look at adjusted passing success rate last season, but it's not really a defense that I have a ton of faith in, and defense is very unpredictable. So is that true in the sense that you don't believe in Dallas' defense?
Well, I think that they have at least I think what might separate them from being, one of the worst teams in the league is the fact that they do have some elite players on the defense, right? When we look at DeMarcus Lawrence, we look at Micah Parsons, there is legitimate talent there. Overall, that, it's not a truly horrible defense, probably somewhere in the, 16 to 20 range in terms of I would rank them on defense. But I think offensively this week, they are by far the worst offense going into this week in the NFL. When you just consider quarterback, lack of wide receivers, offensive line in shambles right now, they're probably 3 points worse than any other offense in the league. I think going into this week, I firmly believe that. So it's not necessarily just pure defense. Defense did hold the Bucks to 19 points. Granted, the Bucks did consistently move up and down the field. They just sort of bogged down in the red zone. So I don't think this is a game where Cincy's just going to march down and score a touchdown on every drive. But the Cowboys' offense is so limited that I just struggle to see them being able to keep pace or even score in garbage time here. So that's sort of my take there. I think Dallas probably in the 16 to 20 range on defense, but they go into this week with the worst offense in the NFL.
So that says that they're 3 points worse than Atlanta on offense right now with Cooper Rush, who I feel like he wasn't terrible when he got that one start last year, right? Against Minnesota.
Yeah, I've talked about this before also with like small sample size quarterbacks. I think you tend to see as there's more game tape on a quarterback that's, a career backup, they just tend to, I'll use the word decelerate, but we tend to see backups come in, be okay, look better than they actually are. Mike White is a great one that comes to mind for me. And then the more and more you see out of them, the worse and worse it gets. But to me, Dallas's defense is rivaled by Chicago and potentially Houston and Cleveland, I would say. But I do think that Dallas is the worst of the bunch.
Yeah. I think you said defense. I think you meant to say Dallas
offense.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yes.
Yeah. They still have CeeDee Lamb, but basically he's kind of on an island with just not having Dak. And even when Dak was in there, they didn't do much of anything against Tampa Bay, and that has a lot to do with the line, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the challenge right now. Quarterbacks got to get the ball out quicker. Both, any defense putting together a game plan against the Dallas offense is going to try to take CeeDee Lamb out of the game and just make literally anyone else beat them. And you have Noah Brown and Dennis Houston, Simi Fehoko, Jalen Tolbert. Like, these are not household names at wide receiver. So it just becomes challenging. I mean, we know, especially over the course of the last 3 to 5 years, the importance of the wide receivers in the NFL, probably more so than we even considered 5+ years ago. And, if you can't separate from the opposing team, you need to be able to pass nowadays in order to have success. So I think this is a huge uphill battle against a Cincinnati team that played at the absolute bottom end of their range last week, still ended up forcing overtime, could have won the game. I think this is like a get right game for Cincinnati.
Rob, I wanted to ask you about a couple other teams that I'm still personally trying to figure out, and you already started talking about one. The Cincinnati Bengals, they were considered a bottom 5 team kind of heading into last season, at least according to some of my metrics, but obviously made it all the way to the Super Bowl. I don't think anyone would say that they deserved to make the Super Bowl. They had their breaks. They were certainly good enough to be a playoff team, but had some breaks getting all the way to the Super Bowl. A lot of the same players on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, we've seen a lot of growth with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase on the offense. I mean, how good is this Bengals team?
To me, the Bengals starters are very good. Their depth is not. So I would start to get concerned about Cincinnati if they start to suffer some injuries this year, because I think they're one of the teams in the league with the least depth overall when you compare their starters to their backup. Overall, though, I still think it's a good Bengals team. I think the market, if you're just basing this off market power ratings, has them somewhere right around league average right now. I would disagree with that. I think they're much better than that. I don't think there's as big a gap between Cincinnati and Baltimore as a lot of people believe, especially after week 1. I just think it's just a really sloppy game for the Bengals. Joe Burrow didn't really have a preseason. He had an appendectomy, didn't practice a whole lot. They turned the ball over. Of the 5 turnovers, 4 of them were in Pittsburgh territory. Like, that could have been a blowout game, even if the Bengals turned it over 3 times instead of 5. I was concerned about the running game against the Steelers. They did rush the ball 30 times. They only had a 20% success rate. Steelers do have a very good defensive front, though, now suffering from injuries. But overall, 70 passes, 49% success rate through the air for the Bengals. it was the turnovers that killed them. I think they'll right the ship. I mean, I personally think that they're an extremely talented football team, and I'm not going to put too much stock into the week 1 loss.
For sure. Do you see them as a legitimate Super Bowl contender coming out of the AFC?
Depends how we define legitimate. Like they would be what I would say is a dark horse. Can the Bengals win the Super Bowl? Yes, I think they can. It would take a lot of things to go right. There's definitely better teams in the AFC overall, but they proved last year you get into the playoffs, you just need a few things to go right. So I would say yes, although it would be certainly a long shot.
Right. I mean, you're definitely putting behind the Kansas Cities and the Los Angeles Chargers of the world.
Right. I mean, just Buffalo, KC are a breed of their own right now. And then you kind of got a gap probably to Chargers, Baltimore, and then maybe a small gap after that where you can lump in a bunch of teams, whether that's Denver, Miami, maybe even now Chargers. I said the Chargers already, but you know what I'm getting at. They're a couple tiers below the top tier.
Rob, next team I wanted to ask you about is the New York Giants. Brian Daboll comes over from Buffalo, where he did wonders with that offense, and he gets the joy of coaching Daniel Jones. They got a win in Week 1 against Tennessee. What do you see about the long-term prospects for this Giants team?
Still don't think that they're very good overall. Very, very impressed with Saquon Barkley against Tennessee. He definitely had some burst. He, to me, was someone watching the games that stood out as, okay, he's actually a running back that is impactful to this offense. Like if Saquon Barkley gets hurt and we start to see backups playing for the Giants, I do think that that's going to actually impact the spread. Matt Breida being the backup there. So he looked very good to me. Who did not look very good to me was Daniel Jones again. You look at 32 passes for the Giants, 41% success rate, negative 0.21 EPA per play, threw a bad interception in the red zone, didn't feel pressure on a drop back where he ended up fumbling as well. I just think they're so limited at the quarterback position. Unless this defense turns out to be much better than I think they are, which is, I think the Giants defense is probably slightly above average. Unless they turn out to be, in the elite range, I still don't think this is a team that's going to win 8-9 games this year. I don't think they're a competitor in the NFC East. I just think they're too limited at the quarterback position in order to do so. So impressive win, not high on the Titans either, but Giants coming from behind, you have to give them credit regardless. It's just, I'm not going to concern myself too much with that one game. I still think that they're deficient of talent at a lot of positions on both sides of the ball. I struggle to see them being for real this year.
So even with Brian Daboll calling the plays, making life as easy as possible for Daniel Jones, it's just not enough because he doesn't have the talent.
I don't think so. I mean, one thing that's going to go unnoticed as well here is that, or not unnoticed necessarily, but there's a new metric that I like to look at. It's been tweeted a lot by some of the PFF guys, but series conversion rate. So that's basically the rate at which a series that starts on first down earns a new first down or a touchdown on that same series. The Giants were one of the lower numbers in the league at 69% this week on the 26 series that they ran. But most importantly, 17 of those 26 series started with a running play. And they were much less successful on those. I think they are going to lean heavily on the running game. I don't think Daboll fully trusts Daniel Jones. We saw them get into a spat on the sideline already this weekend. And I just, as much as the running game worked for them this week, I just don't see that as a path to success for them over the course of a year against the schedule that they're going to play. So people see a 21-20 final score. Giants win as a 5.5 point underdog. Everyone upgrades the Giants. I really don't think I'm going to be doing that after this week.
Right. Do you think that's the right call for Daboll to go against everything he's done the last 3 seasons in Buffalo? And I believe the first season when he really started throwing on early downs, we didn't really think much of Josh Allen at that point, if I'm not mistaken. So is this the right approach?
Very different, in my opinion, because Josh Allen only had 2 seasons under his belt before he became an elite quarterback, where Daniel Jones has a large sample of being a well below average quarterback. So to me, that's the difference. Now, you can argue that Daniel Jones has never had a great coach either, and maybe Daboll can get something out of him. He didn't really get much out of him in week one from an efficiency perspective. So ultimately, it's tough for a guy like Daboll because he's hampered by the quarterback no matter what he does. So I think it's important for the coach to adjust to the cards that they've been, or the deck that they've been dealt, essentially. In this case, you know what Daniel Jones is, and you have to adjust for that. So I'm not suggesting that, they would be better off coming out and slinging the ball all over the field rather than starting with that first down run or whatever. I'm just saying that, typically starting your series with that many running plays is not a path to success. They don't really have a quarterback where they can just come out and pass the ball all over the field. So I struggle to see how this is going to be an effective offense going forwards.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. Rob, last I wanted to ask you about New England. This is a team that had an interesting time coming into the season because there's no offensive coordinator, there's no defensive coordinator. Not really sure who's calling the plays, but have Mac Jones, had a good rookie year. Pass offense was pretty good last year. Now he's dinged up. Lost some key pieces on the defense. Lost to Miami this week. What are you seeing with the Patriots?
Very concerned about their defense. I'll mention that series conversion rate again. The Dolphins at a 75% series conversion rate this week. Dolphins were 48% success rate on 58 plays. They kind of moved the ball however they wanted. And I didn't think Tua played a particularly good game either. I thought he missed some very easy throws. So Tua, I don't want to say he's not his best because we don't know what his best is, but I don't think he played very well. Yet the Dolphins, from a success rate standpoint, were pretty efficient. Only scored 20 points, but they were able to move the ball. The Patriots, on the other hand, a lot of self-inflicted errors, right? Miami had a 4th and 1 that they were going for on offense. Patriots defense jumps offside. You get the Mac Jones fumble 6. You get a Mac Jones interception in the end zone on their first possession as well. So when you look at the Patriots week 1, you'll see a team that was pretty successful in terms of success rate on 54 plays, but a negative 0.21 EPA per play, largely because of the turnovers. Now, the zone blocking scheme on offense might have contributed to that fumble 6. It's still something that they're getting used to, although it didn't look like they ran a ton of zone blocks. I have to watch that game again before giving a full assessment. Overall, I still don't think the Patriots are as bad as people think that they are. I do think that they're significantly worse than last season. But it really was like a comedy of errors for them last week. I don't know if they can entirely clean it up, but I think I'm much higher on their offense, even after a 7-point output. All but one of their drives went into the Dolphins' territory last weekend. They ended up with 7 points. I think there'll be some positive regression there at some point. So very wide range on what they could be. I think that they're probably better than people think that they are, but still not a good team.
You're right. Yeah, I was higher on New England than everyone else. I liked them plus 3.5 against Miami, which obviously didn't work out. But I think that offense should be good. Offense is more predictable than pass offense is more predictable than just about anything else. They were good last year. Any concerns about the play calling?
Most of what I saw was Miami on offense in this game, watching the red zone coverage. I haven't rewatched the game in full, so it's difficult to say. They did pass the ball 34 times to only 20 runs. A lot of that, though, is because they were trailing in the game. In terms of early downs, 25 passes, 18 runs. I'm okay with that. Overall, I'm just more interested to see if this offensive line holds up, because on paper, other than their left guard, Cole Strange, who they drafted much higher than people thought they would, it's a pretty solid offensive line, especially at the key positions of Trent Brown at left tackle, David Andrews center, Isaiah Wynn right tackle. So I do think that they'll be able to push some teams around on the ball going forwards. But just on the surface, the play calling to me doesn't seem like it was too suspect.
Great. Rob, let's have a fun question. Who's the worst team in the NFL?
I think it's the Chicago Bears. I think if you look at the betting market, based off the way the spreads are shaping up this week, they would say it's either Houston or Dallas. I still think Chicago is worse than those teams. I think Chicago had about as fraudulent a win as imaginable over the 49ers. They win 19-10 as a 6.5 point underdog, 204 yards of total offense in that game. Trey Lance was especially bad. So, I mean, I think you do have to give the Bears defense some credit to holding the Niners to 10 points, but I thought Trey Lance was the worst quarterback of any quarterback in the league in week one. I still think it's the Bears in terms of talent on both sides of the ball. It's just very difficult for me to see that team, even after winning one game, be remotely competitive in a lot of their games this year. Offensive line is poor. Defense is just, they do have a few household names, I guess you would say, in Robert Quinn and Roquan Smith and Eddie Jackson. Aside from that, they're really lacking talent across the board. When all the final cuts happened, the Bears actually picked up 6 players off of waivers, just to let you know what they think of their team going into the year. It's so to me, the Bears are still worse. Betting market would disagree with me, but if you gave me Houston as they stand right now, or Dallas as they stand right now, pick them against the Bears on a neutral field, I would take either of those teams.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, Robert Quinn had a great year last year, but I mean, he's not going to reproduce that production on the defensive side of the ball, right? And I think they try to get rid of him this offseason. So, yeah, interesting. What about the Falcons? Are they in the competition for you?
I'm higher on the Falcons than most people are. I didn't bet them week one. I had the over in that game, but I mean, Saints closed 5.5. I was closer to 4 in that game, and I think I'm a little bit higher than the Saints. Higher than market on the Saints. I don't know. Atlanta's defense is going to be a problem. I think their offense does have some upside, though. They can move the pocket around for Mariota a little bit. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Cordero Patterson. That's a pretty decent, 3 offensive weapons that they have overall. I think they'll be more competitive. I'm not sure that necessarily leads to wins for them, as we saw them, blow a lead against New Orleans last week. But I put them in a tier above. If we have the worst of the worst, I think they're a tier above that.
Excellent. Rob, how about a surprising prediction for the 2022 NFL season?
I will say surprising prediction. I don't know that he'll win Coach of the Year, but I think Nathaniel Hackett will be in the conversation for Coach of the Year at season's end. And that this whole week one thing will blow over. It will be forgotten because ultimately, when it comes down to voting, it's teams that make a jump from year to year. I do still think that Denver is going to be a good football team, despite what we saw from them on Monday Night Football. Think, again, we talked about it off the top, a bit of a misleading final score there in that a ton went wrong for the Broncos. We didn't even mention the penalties in that game, which were extremely, extremely lopsided as well. But I do think by season end, Denver will be a contender. They will be in a playoff spot, and Nathaniel Hackett will be getting a lot of the praise for righting the ship, even though we know, most of us fans will know that a lot of it was Russell Wilson. I think that he's the type of coach that will end up getting hyped. So I would say that people would find that very surprising based off of last night's game.
I certainly find that surprising. It's good to talk to you, Rob, because you're getting some of this small sample size garbage out of my head as I wake up from
it's tough
watching that game last night. I'm sure you can bet on Coach of the Year, right? I mean, you should be able to get some steep odds for him if he's even on the table at all after that game last night.
I haven't checked updated markets this morning. I know going into the year, Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell was favored, which I agree with that. They fit the profile of exactly what I was just talking about, right? A team that, they didn't really quite live up to expectations last year, but they are, I think, a pretty solid football team that will make the playoffs. So, I think that's rightfully, the favorite leading up to the season. It's more so that I just think that there will be other teams that do the exact same thing. Kevin O'Connell still favored 8-1. Nathaniel Hackett is actually 18-1 as of now. So that's a pretty big long shot.
Yeah, I'm seeing 20-1 on FanDuel. Kevin O'Connor, Brandon Staley leading the pack at 8-1. Mike McDaniel in there too. So value on Nathaniel Hackett at 20-1?
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, look, what do Kevin O'Connell, Brandon Staley, Mike McDaniel all have in common? They're all on teams that underperformed last year relative to expectations, who are expected to have good teams this year. All their teams started 1-0 in week one. Brian Daboll's next on the list as well. Same exact thing, right? And then you have a gap, and you have, Nathaniel Hackett, which is basically, below Dan Campbell. I don't agree with that at all, because I think the likelihood of the Lions having a good season is low. So I think when you just think it's very reactionary to week one, but and Hackett did look like an absolute clown in that situation, but I still do think that he's very live at that price.
Yeah, but overreactions and stuff is how you find value sometimes, right? So, all right, I like it. Nathaniel Hackett, 20-1. Rob Pizzola, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter and more detail, and just remind everyone about the Hammer.
Absolutely. You can follow me on Twitter at my name, at Rob Pizzola, Pizzola. Please check out my new content network, the Hammer Betting Network. You can check it out at thehammer.bet, and you can follow us on Twitter at thehammerhq. And please, for those who are betting on sports, download BetStamp. Check it out in your browser if you want to at betstamp.app. But I do preach line shopping, getting the best price available whenever you're going to go out and make a bet. I think that is absolutely crucial to being a successful bettor. So the Hammer Betting Network, BetStamp, please check them both out.
Rob, thanks again.
Thanks, Ed.
Hey, this is Ed Fang, host of the Football Analytics Show. I really hope you enjoyed that interview with Rob Pizzola. I have no idea how he does it each and every day, being a pro bettor, running BetStamp, and now founding thehammer.bet. I actually don't really want to know how he does it, but I feel like we can just all take advantage of the content that he is doing. Please go check out thehammer.bet. Also, we forgot to mention he does a Periscope every Sunday. It now goes under the heading Pizza Buffet because he's Bobby Pizza on Twitter. He gives out NFL insights, so you can check that out on The Hammer. I think their Twitter page should have that. But you can find everything at thehammer.bet. This podcast is supported by listeners like you through Patreon. At the $5 per month level, you get my sincere thanks and also a patron-only episode every month. If you decide to support the podcast right now, there's an episode on home and rest advantage waiting for you. At the $10 per month level, you get everything at the lower tier and also the Establish the Pass mug when you sign up. I've gotten a lot of compliments on this mug, and it's the same one that I drink my coffee out of every morning. There's also a third tier if you really want to engage with football analytics. To support the Football Analytics Show, go to patreon.com/footballanalytics. Patreon is Patreon. Football Analytics is all one word. Once again, that's patreon.com/footballanalytics. Just a reminder, you can also get my free sports betting newsletter. You can check that out at thepowerrank.com. Once again, my name is Ed Fang. I'm honored to be your host for the Football Analytics Show, and I'll be back with another interview next week.